Good evening.
Dave, hi.
I'm really glad you could be here tonight. Could you tell us briefly something about yourself, your family, what you do these days?
Yeah, well, the key thing that you need to know about me is when I was 17, the day I started work with your father-in-law, who sits out here, Graham Solly. And there we were, two young, keen, what we call junior trainee. Thank you, at Qantas. We thought we were junior managers till they showed us to the mailroom. But here we are, we're still kicking on. My son had a recent birthday party, which a big party. It's obviously my 40th. So Graham Elizabeth were there, and he kind of had to share this story about his daughter who just turned 16. And he sent out a Twitter saying, you're getting older, this is my son who's in politics, when your eldest daughter turns 16. And somebody, my son shared this with me, tweeted back to him and said, you're getting older when you're bending over to do your shoelaces and think, what else can I do when I'm down here? So that doesn't apply to Graham now, of course. But anyway, so it's a long story. We have been mates for years, for a long time. Groomsmen at each other's weddings, and we have, Judy and I have been married almost 50 years, and we've got 3 kids. One's in politics, one's in the media, and one works for an airline. Okay. Sounds familiar.
Still in the family. You're in politics for how many years?
I was in 20 years.
20 years.
So 11 years in state. 7 years as a Minister for Transport, Minister for Sydney's Olympic bid, Minister for Tourism, Minister for Roads, Ports, whatever. And then in Canberra, I was Chairman of the Economics Committee and a number of other committees.
A particular highlight from your time in politics?
Well, clearly, when Juan Antonio read out and the winner is a pseudonym, that was a highlight. My whole body was in Monte Carlo, and my legs and arms were cramping up, thinking, if we lose, everyone's going to blame me. When we won, of course, everyone claimed credit.
Well, we know it was you. It's okay. We're much 20. We know it was you.
So yeah, that was clearly a super exciting thing when you, after all that work, it was like fire rockets going on off inside you. It was just so spectacular, and everyone there, and singing everything Australian we knew all night, including I Like Aeroplane Jelly. Was quite a highlight.
Well, you're scratching the bottom of the barrel there. Now, during your time in politics, particularly federal politics, you were reasonably outspoken about the issue of asylum seekers. What got you interested or involved in that discussion personally?
Well, I think I had no particular interest in the area. My interest was in economic issues, and obviously I'd been very interested in sport, but transport and all of those things, administration of government. I went to Canberra, and the issue of asylum seekers I never really thought about at all. These are people who arrived on boats, shouldn't we stop them, etc. And then I was asked to go on the Human Rights Committee, and so we were thinking about different things, and I was also in the Immigration Committee. The Immigration Committee decided they'd look at the question of asylum seekers. I was taken off the committee because I was chairing an inquiry into the retail sector, where work holes and Woolworths too big, etc. And that took me out for a whole number of months. By the time I came back, they just finished their report. It was called Not the Hilton or something like that, and about detention centres. And I'm looking through it, and I said, sorry, I wasn't involved in this report, but I'm just wondering where your involvement was with the asylum seekers. And they said, well, we were advised by the Immigration Department. It was not advisable. We talked to them. So they went to the detention centres. They talked to all the officials and the people who ran it, but didn't actually talk to the people within. So I thought, well, that's a little bit curious. And I went to talk to the Human Rights Committee chairman and said, do you know that this report didn't actually talk to anybody? He said, well, let's do our own. And so we did. And so we went all around Australia and talked to, we had spoke to 3 groups of 25 in each. The third group was women and children only. We didn't allow any officials in. We just asked them to say what we thought. Bear in mind, we probably need some definitional issues. Asylum seekers are those who rock up on our shore and say, I want to claim asylum, either by boat or by air. There's more arrive by air, actually, than arrive by boat, but you wouldn't think so. The people who arrive by air and claim asylum are exactly the same as people who arrive by boat. Nobody kind of looks at them, but they're treated entirely differently. They go out in the community, their claims are assessed, no one worries about them. And so it's a most extraordinary thing. Well, people who arrive by boat, we have to do something differently. So we spoke to them, and when we were in these, we kind of got on, and I thought, oh, well, it'd be interesting, we'll fly around Australia and see and talk to these people. And I don't think I've ever been quite as confronted in my life by what I found. And I found people who'd been there for up to 7 years, sitting in detention. 7 years in these places. In a place of Curtin, which is the northwest of Australia. These were called dongas, the sheds, basically. Barbed wire, 3 rows of barbed wire fenced around, 25 foot high. Kids there as well, people spaced out, and clearly a lot of them who developed mental conditions for being locked up. 1 television for the whole camp, no sporting equipment, no newspapers. They were driving them quietly mad. And in several of them, they had a prison within the prison. So if the guards didn't like you, they put you into prison, even with your own kids, and locked you up. I'm saying, what? And people in our committee was stunned. In this day and age, in Australia, what on earth are we doing? And people were suffering from depression. They couldn't get treatment. They were stuck out there. And,
What year was that?
That was 2000. Okay. When we did the report. And wrote a report, which with a whole number of recommendations, about 25 of them, and released the report. As you can imagine, it's bipartisan, it's Liberal Labor on it. And it went down like a total lead balloon. Our report was dumped on by the minister at the time and the rest of the government. In the party room, people stood up and said, well, I want to say that I got into this parliament because of our stand on refugees, and I don't want you upsetting it, okay? All right? So it was interesting when you collectively dumped on, when you see something that you think is quite appalling. I mean, we even had, when people in these detention centres, they weren't called by names, they were called by numbers. They were woken up in the middle of the night and lights shone in their face to find out whether they were still there. In this day and age, in Australia. Anyway, that's what got me involved. Sorry, long answer.
No,
you can stay with me.
Incredible. Yeah, no, we're just going.
I know you all want to get back.
Your favourite colour? Yeah. Can I ask you this, if there's a short answer, then I'm going to pray, then I'm going to hand over to you. But what's one thing that the church needs to understand about the issues in regards to asylum seekers?
Well, I think that for a lot of you hear the rhetoric like this. It is illegals, boat people, Muslims on our shore, they're going to bring in Sharia law, bring all their mates, live off the government, we'll be swamped by them if we do. I think it's for us to stand back and say, what is we as Christians called to do in the face of this particular situation? Should we say, this is outrageous? And I have, from some of my Christian friends, as recently as a week ago, a whole email went around to say, comparing it to this is the situation in Germany. If somebody said, people in Germany didn't stand up, they didn't realise what was happening. We're going to have Muslims coming in the place, they're going to put in Sharia law and take it over. So what my approach would be to think what it requires. When you have the example of the Good Samaritan, and when the Samaritan, who was the equivalent of someone from Indonesia, came and looked after this person, what does that mean to us today? The example by Christ himself of looking at someone in need. These, in my view, are people in extreme need very often. There are those people who rule the system, there is no doubt. appropriately, are they refugees or not? But just to change our mindset in terms of this is a disadvantaged group. Christ calls on us to love them. What does that mean?
Well, let me pray, and I will sit down. Father, we thank you for even what we've heard so far. And we ask that as we sit here tonight and listen and ask, that you would help us to gain new insight and new understanding about people you call us to love. Father, thank you that your word is clear on our call to love the alien amongst us. That we're even meant to love our enemies, let alone those who have needs. So Father, please teach us something new and call us to respond anew to what we hear.
Thanks, Dave. Well, yeah, it's great to be with you and those people who came out when the finals of the US Australian Open are on tonight. Well done. We were down in Melbourne last night, so it was fun for the women's final with most people going for Lena. I think, well, what happened, I think, with Azarika the night before, or the day before. We had an early start today and down the Palmy swim, so it's been a long day. I also got something to say in terms of your pastor here, your rector, and we had coffee during the week, and he was just talking about what I've been involved in and so on. And as Graham would know, when I was 23, I applied for Moore College, I was knocked back. I thought schizophrenia was my problem. They thought something was wrong with my kidneys. They didn't have the equipment there to tell that it wasn't a problem. But the Lord, in His graciousness, didn't put the door up because He had other things for me to do. And I said to Dave, it's probably, I said, I don't think I would have been really suited. And he said, why not? I said, well, strong, over-opinionated attitude, aggressive and so on. He said, you would have fitted perfectly in Moore College.
That was a private conversation.
Anyway, so in terms of what is my role now in terms of this area, and I'm chairman of the Refugee Resettlement Council, and I'm sure sometimes the government, current Labor government, appointed me. I'm sure they often wish they hadn't, because I feel free, because I'm no longer in politics. I can express my own view, so I say freely if I think something's wrong. And I mean, we have got some things which are really wrong at the moment. And the whole thing is, we've had this whole thing about Nauru, and is just questionable about what they're doing in terms of this. Because the reality with Nauru, when it was there, is 70% of the people who went to Nauru ended up in Australia as Australian citizens. So, the people smugglers know that. Has it changed since they've announced they're going to Nauru? Not at all. And then they said, let's put them on temporary protection visas. You heard of Tony. I mean, I like Tony and know Tony. The temporary protection visas means that you have no status. So we say you're a refugee, but we don't give you any status as such. So you're not entitled to welfare or social security, etc. You're in there in limbo. You don't have proper work rights, so you aren't able to work effectively, and what happens is people end up on charity. You also can't have a reunion with your family. You can't bring them out. So if you're a married guy with kids, you mightn't see them for years. Now, how does that fit in with trying to build a good community and have them here as part of us? Because if they've been given asylum, they've gone from being an asylum seeker to being classified as a refugee, they are going to be Australians. Make no doubt of it. So why don't we say to them, right, guys, you're in, and let's teach you English properly, and which of course is part of the program which is in it, and let's kind of get you part of the community and out at work, and you can help make this country strong. But no, we don't do that. And the other appalling thing is the panel of experts, and one of the panel of experts is on my committee that I chair. So I know well Paris Aristotle, and we had this whole debate with our committee because they made several recommendations. One was the recommendation that Dave made, is that you excise Australia as a migration zone. So Australia, you say Australia is not Australia for the point of migration. What? What is that? It's just so that people can't make the claim and have access to the courts. So it's not part of Australia. And the worst part of it is there's no advantage clause. So that if you come to Australia by boat, then you get no advantage on the fact that you're there. So it means that theoretically people who go and put in Nauru or Manus Island can be there 5 years and up, because it can take you anything 14 years, and you sit there, go quietly mad, have all these problems, and then you say, welcome to Australia, good to see you, buddy, you know, sign up here, you're part of us. And meanwhile, how does that work? And I did say, as recently as this week, in a meeting with the Minister, I just want to say that the broader community in which I'm involved, in the refugee community, think this is an appalling policy. He didn't say anything, he just sat there, and I would say equally to Tony about it. So there are policies out there that think we should stand up and say, is that the right way to treat people? From my point of view, if people are not genuine refugees, then send them back. Do it quickly, so you don't have people sitting around forever, 5, 7 years. You don't have them sitting in detention centres. But within 3 months, you make a decision. You're either in or out. And there are a whole number of people who do it for just purely economic reasons. Their brother's cousin has organised some job in Melbourne. You're out, back. Nice to see you. But, you know, people who are genuinely oppressed, then you need to do something about it. So, let me tell you about one of the guys. When I first got involved in this whole process, after our report that we did in 2000, then I was brought to the case as a guy called Cliff Powell. Some of you might know, he's a psychologist in Northern Beach, Christian psychologist, great guy. And he came to me and said, look, there's a group of Christians who go out to Villawood, to the centre there, and to the refugee centre, detention centre. They, you know, meet with them. They established a Christian group within, which is also another myth that you've got, with places being overrun by Muslims. Actually, there are more Christians who come as refugees than anybody else. You know, of course, there's a lot of Muslims as well. But there was they had a whole group there, and they used to have like Bible studies and so on there. So this young guy who's about 21, and he's a young Iranian, and he's been knocked back twice, from primary decision and secondary decision when they did the review. And look, he's a very keen young Christian, and a Syrian evangelical. So there's, you know, this, I don't know whether you know about this Syrian church. They're strongly evangelical right there in Iran and some of the Middle Eastern countries. And they said he's going to be deported, and I want to meet him. So I went out to meet him. He was a terrific young guy, very keen as a Christian and so on. Told me about his family, is that they were involved in this church in Iran, and they had been harassed by the local mullah. And so they, you know, it became worse, and they started to be really persecute this group. So the group basically decided they'd go to different parts of the world. Some went to the US, some went to the UK. And this particular guy's family, Joseph, went down when he was 14, down to live illegally in Greece. No rights at all, couldn't go to school. And so what he did, he washed cars down at the, you know, down in Athens illegally, till he had enough to get himself down to Australia, where he arrived at the airport and then claimed asylum, aged 21. And he was put in detention. They reviewed his case, said no, and then it was reviewed again. So they said, look, he's really a keen young Christian, and he really should be given a chance. So I went to see Philip Ruddock, who's the Minister for Immigration. And he said, well, I'll give you the file. And I had this young Jewish guy who was working for me, And he went through the file, and then he was working for quite a while, and he came rushing to my office and said, I found out why this guy was knocked back. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, he claimed that he was having religious persecution, but they didn't believe him because he couldn't name the church that he went to, and the location and what its name was. And he told them he went to a house church. And the people who interviewed him from immigration did not believe his story, and it was reviewed again, and he failed. So he said, that's what said, this Jewish guy, that's what it is. They didn't believe that he went to a house church. So, you know, for us, we know about house churches and so on. So I went up to Philip Ruddock and I said, mate, you know, this is what the story is. They knocked him back because he went to a house church. And Philip goes to the Anglican Church of Benton Hills. Took a couple of weeks, decided he would listen to the story, and he signed him in, gave him permanent residency. There was much joy. I rang this guy to speak to him, and got put through, and he said, well, I'm so thrilled. He said, this morning in my Bible reading, I was reading about Joseph down in Egypt when he was in prison, and he said, the section that I was focusing on was, and the Lord came unto Joseph, and he said, I just felt it. I said, you know, as if there was something special going to happen. He was so excited. So out he came. He went to work at a factory at night, went to school during the day, got himself qualified for university, did engineering, and was working as a translator at the Anglican Church. I can't remember whether it was Blacktown or Parramatta, where they've got a big Iranian community. And he acted as the interpreter at the services there. And we went to his wedding, big Christian wedding, lots of people, 400 people there, and it was fantastic. But there were lots of those. I was involved in about 50 people, getting about 50 people out, who were there, they'd been knocked back, predominantly Christians, because don't think that, you know, the immigration people are necessarily sympathetic to the Christians. There were 16 Chaldean Catholics who'd been knocked back from Iraq, and they sat there for years. One of them attempted suicide, and, you know, he got involved with this. So the compelling cases of what was happening. So we kind of looked at what was happening from our experience in the Human Rights Committee. We decided this was not acceptable. Understand the problem of having secure borders and doing it under proper control. Of course, our numbers are a small fraction of what countries in Europe have, or the United States, or Canada. It is a very small number by comparison. Incredibly small. And, you know, as somebody I was asked by Julia Gillard when she was Education Minister to do a report on international education, and which I completed, 18 months ago, so, and the changes that we recommended all basically been implemented and gone through the Parliament. But when I was there, I discovered that there were 100,000 students, international students, who were lined up for permanent residency, who all met the qualifications, despite a lot of them having gone to shonky colleges doing hospitality and cooking or something, or community welfare, when it was just basically a path into migration. 100,000, and there's all this carry on, about 6,000 people who came by boat. Just to put it in perspective. Now, a lot of those issues have been addressed as well, but, you know, I just kind of tried to get the balance. So we actually, as a whole group of us who were concerned in the Parliament, went to see the Prime Minister and said, we are concerned about these issues. And said, you know, listen to us, sympathetic, and so, oh, we'll try to do this. And we saw the Minister, and yes, yeah, we'll try and make some changes. Children not being able to go to school. You know, Port Hedland, there was a whole lot of them. In behind these 25-foot wire areas that weren't allowed to go to school. And they've been there for years. What is this? So had changes in schools, we had changes in trying to get some family units, but it made it so difficult. And finally, we decided in 2004, grievous that it was not going to happen unless we brought in a private members bill, which we did. And it was, so we had lots of meetings with the Prime Minister, and we got, as a result of that, he decided that we would make some changes in terms of processing, original processing within 3 months, review within, so if they didn't meet that, there had to be an explanation to Parliament, and the review had to be within 3 months. Temporary protection visas would be stopped, interestingly. Watch the video. And the third thing is that families could not go into detention centres, could go out in the community. Now, a lot of those changes were made, and then there's been a rollback, as we've got in the political process, rolling back. So under this government, who was out there, you know, yelling all the things and supporting us in our claim, it's just as bad. Just as bad, if not worse, because there's no advantage clause. And, you know, even as Dave talked about this excising the whole of Australia, you know, I abstained from the bill, others crossed the floor, the Labor Party all supported us and so on. Then at the dead of the night, just a few weeks ago, before Christmas, the bill comes through, the same thing, excising. Oh, we want to make it easy, don't we? So it is a challenge for us in terms of, as Christians, how do we respond? Do they get $10,000 in terms of, you know, you've probably seen these chain letters that go around, you know, how many bring them out in their boats, and they'll bring their family, and they're all on a fortune, they're getting the Housing Commission house, they're getting all the social security. Total wrong. People who come by boat, what level of assistance do they get? Basically, nothing. Nothing. If you come as a refugee from offshore, from the camps and so on, being processed by UNHCR and on the borders of Thailand and so on, which is a terrific program, don't get me wrong, I'm all in favour of refugee processing as you do. You know, we've been going on for ages, and we should see more of these centres offshore, us processing them when we can. Basically, you know, these people come in and they get the assistance because our committee looks at this and they get English teaching, training for a number of hours, and they also get, you know, some temporary accommodation when they arrive. Some people who've been subject to war trauma have had their kids shot in front of them, as quite a number did from Africa, then they get counselling. But the others are basically get nothing. They've come by boat, and they've given their, you know, if they finally get approval, they get some but limited assistance, nothing like that. And it is grossly deceptive. By all means, I think, to put them out in the community and help do that. So look, that's some of the issues that we confront today. How do we, where's it going? What, should we be doing something differently to it? But I've got to say that we, you know, I decided that I would, people say when I was in Parliament, we're the model for the rest of the world to follow. Everyone's jealous of us in Europe and UK, and they're following us, and they're doing the same in the US and so on. So I decided to go to Europe and to write a report, which I sent to all of my colleagues. It was read by everyone, including the Prime Minister, and to the US and Canada. We've got the toughest regime in the world, the toughest, without a doubt. The least compassionate of any country. And we keep people in detention longer. Most of them, they do not go into detention. They go in for a limited period where their identity is sorted out, their medical issues are sorted out, they're giving briefings. Then they're out in the community while they're being processed. And I think that's, you know, something that we need to think about as well. You know, as Christians, I think it's a real challenge. And we think of the injunction that Christ had in terms of, you know, as a separation of, in the last days, when Christ said, you know, I'll be separating people out, you know, and you know, I talk about those, as he talks about those who cared for the homeless and those in prison and so on. It's said, well, where were we? You know, when did you visit me when I was in prison, etc.? I think we're called on, well, what do we do with these people? Because there's a lot like my friend Joseph Maracle, who's out there and part of the community, terrific people, and just trying to make you aware of some of those issues. So I think that's probably as a general comment, and happy to answer some questions before you all get home to watch tennis.
I didn't know there was tennis on.
Have you got prepared questions?
I've got some questions, and I know there's
it's
people
called
that have
Dorothy Dix
questions. Yes. Certainly is. But before you do, we've got a guy here who's brought along some t-shirts, and he made them up. And it's funny that in Australia we have such an issue with boat people coming here. It says problem with boat people, so did we. He's got them for sale tonight. You want one that's well out the back. And I guess it's that issue that makes me wonder why this is such a... You said that the percentages that come to Australian shores of asylum seekers, refugees, are really small compared to the rest of the world. And we have the toughest regime compared to the rest of the world. Why is Australia so lacking compassion on this matter? And why is it such a massively... so can we talk about political issue? Why is it in Australia?
Yeah, look, I think within us all there's kind of a racist element that can flare up. I mean, we had an email during the week from a good Christian lady sending out about and she had to say about this German lady, that was said during the war, we who are Germans saw the Nazis arrive, we didn't do anything, let them emerge. The same it is with these Muslims coming to our country. We need to stand up to them, and they are going to look at countries overseas, what they do and so on. In Canada, they remove the Lord's Prayer, they put in all these prayer rooms for the Muslims. So I've got a Canadian researcher in one of the companies I'm involved with, and I rang her and said, could you find out where this story comes from? He said, right. She said, it sounds very un-Canadian. So what it was is she went to the Toronto Star, which was said it was in Canada. It was in Toronto where there was a debate of whether there should be provision in those schools where there's a lot of Muslims to provide a prayer room. They weren't sure. Now, you're looking at the example of a Catholic school in the UK, that in a Catholic school that was actually provided a prayer room for the Muslims to be there. That was it. It was the whole thing. It's all been, so it builds on, and I just wrote back and said, Judy, of course, told me not to. See why I wouldn't have been suited for more college. I wrote back and said, look, I agree with you that if good people stand back and say nothing, that evil persists, of course we know. But there is the question, another part of the Third Reich and what they did, to remember. They vilified the Jews, and they made them a target. These are the evil ones. And of course, with September 11, and of course this has built a lot. I think there is within Australians a concern about the yellow peril. People from the north, Japanese planning to take over Australia. Will that happen again? We feel vulnerable, big country, wonderful country, small population. Are these people trying to do that? So I think part of it. But it was also exploited, there's no doubt, in 2001, and when the election, polling was not good for the coalition. I was there, I remember, and then, of course, the whole issue of the Tampa emerged, and that was exploited very successfully, and the election was won convincingly. People said, this is fertile territory. And of course, not only that, when you've got the Telegraph screaming headlines on these things, and out in the western suburbs, or where marginal seats are, the polling shows it's a hot issue. So where they go? Sue.
Thanks. If, as you say, the Christian response to asylum seekers is justice and compassion, there seems to be a bit of a PR problem, because out there you've got the biggest calls for justice and compassion coming from secular areas like the Greens, hobbies people, and how can that help to overcome issues of apathy or ignorance?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I think there is a danger in, and it's a phenomenon in the States, that evangelicals can get in this whole thing that led to the Tea Party, and they became very concerned with minority groups, immigration issues, homophobia, racism, etc. And we've got to be careful. I was interested to see the programs that you've had trying to address that as Christians. And look, it's hard. Scott Morrison's a friend of mine. And we talk, and we've debated often. He was my successor in Cook. Look, he's got a job to do. So I don't judge him, and it's difficult. I was told, Peter Costello said, I'd never put you in immigration. He said, I want a hard right wing in there. So it was, I know the expectations of the party people on them. But, it's up to us to kind of question when people say these things. And like down the surf club, I swim most mornings, and down the surf club, getting down, when that boat went missing, there's all these people drowned. Somebody down the surf club said, what's happened about those people in the boats, that they're missing? And somebody said, well, I don't know, but I hope they all drown. And I said, you've got to be joking. What is this? But in terms of what we can do, I think number one is pray for them. Two, sometimes it'd be nice to have, a Christian refugee come and talk to you about, some of the issues that some of them are very articulate, wonderful people. And you'd be surprised how many of them have got really good jobs. And one of them, can you believe, I told Dave, actually he was in Woomera for 18 months, is now working as a naval architect. The Australian Navy. What is this? I think that we can be supportive, we can go there, help people to learn English. The problem is that these enclaves, we don't see refugees in this area. They're all out Auburn, Lidcombe, Bankstown, Blacktown, Liverpool, and so on. And they're overwhelmed. I mean, the immigration minister said, I wish we could swap some. When I was down in Canberra, we could try and get them out of the areas generally. So I think we need to engage in some way, have groups of Christians who are going over and just teaching English and relating. And then, of course, there's the other new one, which the minister outlined this week, where the opportunity for communities to sponsor a refugee's family to come out from there. So just think of some of the Christians who are under real oppression in some overseas countries that a church could actually sponsor a family. Look, there's problems and issues, but just as one way.
Thank you very much for this. That was very insightful. I think that, like a lot of people, I follow this and I'm interested in it, but I find overwhelmingly that the media presents a lot of noise, and there seems to be just this very frustrating rhetoric between both the major political parties. And even just hearing you tonight, break down some of those headlines into just what the actual reality is. I just wondered firstly why, for either of the major political parties, there is no benefit in getting the truth out there. And secondly, why you think the media is so happy just to keep volleying the headlines back and forth.
Well, as an example of what, the distortion, there was a story, you probably, Judy and I get 3 papers a day, it's kind of a hangover from politics. And so we see it all, from the Australian, which is more to the right, the Telegraph, which is to the right, further, just bangs on an issue. So they had a headline, asylum seekers, I can't remember what the actual headline was, but it's all full of professionals and public servants who are rorting the system. Headline news, and it said, a government MP who'd been to Sri Lanka and seen this, So I said, I bet I know who this guy is, so I won't name him, from Western Australia, very right-wing. He's actually the chairman of what's called, each country's got a chairman of Friends of. So I've been chairman of the Friends of India and the chairman of the Friends of South Africa. Then I was chairman of the Friends of the Palestinians, because I thought they needed a bit more help than others. So he was chairman of the Friends of Sri Lanka and got himself several free trips, courtesy of who? The Sri Lankan government. When he sees them, they've got these lovely stories to talk about their political opponents who are getting on boats, embarrassing for them. They give them a story, front page, no question. What's this story about? So in terms of why do they do it? Because of polling. Political polling. At one stage now, in terms of, I chair a group called the Tourism and Transport Forum, and the CEO is a Labor guy. His brother is the president of Labor New South Wales. And we've also got him working in the organisation, one of the vice presidents of the Liberal Party in New South Wales. He said that the Labor Party polling in Western Sydney, asylum seekers was #1 issue. That's why they do it.
But it feeds it.
Oh, yeah.
We react because of what we're given.
That's right. And the papers bang into it because they know people respond. And the worst slant you can give on it, like that headline there, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. You feed it in, somebody rorting the system, and there are rorters. There are people that actually rort. I mean, there was one guy that I was asked to follow up, and Judy knows quite well the guy I'm talking about. Of all the people I know, I had a lot of pressure from Christians on this particular issue. And I just, followed through, went to see the minister and said, about this. I said, love to give him permanent residence, was a man of Vanstone. There is one small problem. I said, oh, what's the small problem? When he was in Indonesia, he just did a small amount of drug running. Oh, I said, is that right? That doesn't mean to say that they're all pure as the driven snow. There are rorters in there, but it does, the stories feed, people know it's an issue, the politicians feed it in. This very day, the launch of the coalition policy. I remember the coalition, my son is coalition member, minister in New South Wales. It's one of the 4 pillars. You think that in this day and age, you want to have something that would lift us a bit beyond just this. But on and on it goes. Unbelievably. Anyway, it's not very political, so yes?
Yeah, I'll try to make myself heard without the mic. But,
can I come to you?
Yeah, sure.
Come on here.
Yeah.
Bruce, sorry, Eric, I'll
Sure,
just jump
right.
in. As we've been leading up over the last few weeks to this particular evening, I've been thinking more and more about it. And looking around the room, other than perhaps the gentleman who's brought the t-shirts, I don't know who that is, but none of us are Indigenous. And so I've been thinking, what gives any of us the right to tell someone else, you can't come here? Because none of us are from here. Ultimately, why do we have the right? And why do we sit here and say, this is a problem that needs to be solved? And we see people arriving on our shore as a problem. Even the fact that I say our shore, I mean really, it's not. Yeah. Our shore, we're just fortunate enough to live here. I came as a 10-pound pom. In fact, I was probably I think my parents were 10-pound poms and I just came in the luggage. But, why is it that is, and in all of the stuff that I've looked at over the last few weeks, I can't find anyone who actually says what the foundation is for even suggesting there's a reason to stop the boats. I can't see any rationale that says there's a good reason to stop anyone coming to this country when none of us are fine.
You're making some good points, and it's very similar. When I was member for Cook, I had a very right-wing branch, and to the right of Genghis, I used to turn up and have lots of debates. the common thing was, you know, look, you need to understand it's Australia for Australians. It's not for these people. You know, we grew up here. And you know, this was in Cronulla, the branch, unsurprisingly. And there were people with t-shirts, you know, I grew here, you flew here. Well, you know, when I was in the branch meeting, I said to people, okay, what I want you to do is all those who go back further than 2 generations, would you please put up your hand? None of them could. Because, you know, I mean, my dad came from Scotland. Out of the Gauls in Scotland, you can't get much worse than that. And, you know, people talk about economic refugees. My grandfather was an economic refugee. Good luck to him. And getting out, coming to this most wonderful country. Now, you know, there needs to be, nevertheless, you can't just say, okay, guys, everything's on, come on down. You know, and I think we've got to have incentives, in my view, offshore, so that people can go to these places and have their, you know, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and with some degree of hope that they might make it, if they're down that far, that they're going to be processed properly. And if they're told no, they're no. It's incentives for them to do that. You know, because they come down and often sit there for years. But people, one of the big things that people say about queue jumpers, this is part of it. These are illegals, these are queue jumpers, and so on. Okay, if you're in Afghanistan and you want to join the queue, because people say to me, you know, look, I did the right thing. When I migrated here, I joined the queue. I had a South African the other day saying this. I joined this queue, this strong South African accent. Not working, I've got to say. Swims every day down the beach, living off welfare, but we'll put that aside. He said, I joined this queue, you know, this is what we did. And I said, okay, well, tell me in Kabul, what do you do? The embassy is kind of, you know, you need to have a special, to find it is extremely difficult. And they take no visas, no applications. The same goes for Baghdad. You can't line up there. And all of these countries, you can't line up in Iran. And the same with people say they throw their passports away. It's because they don't go down to the office and say, look, I'd like my passport, thanks. I want to leave the country. And it doesn't happen. People go over the hills and they find their way out with nothing. So that's part of it. So, yes, I agree with you. I'm expecting a few nasty questions somewhere. There must be somewhere.
You got Eric, yeah.
Actually, sorry to disappoint you. It's a pretty straightforward question. An angle that we see more recently when it comes to these boats arriving in Australia is that, well, it's actually it's the most social thing we can do is actually stop the boats because people are risking their lives in the ocean.
Yeah, it's
it's like, well, because if we made it too easy, we'd have too many boats arrive, more people would risk their lives. Earlier you said that there are a lot more people arriving on planes, and that processing is much more reasonable and much more humane. Would you say that the numbers support that when the process is more humane and people are able to live in the community, that really drives accelerating numbers that come by plane, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers have always been more by plane than boat, because people can pay for a false passport and get on there. But you know, it is the great furphy. You hear the rhetoric. They don't want to say, well, I'm actually a racist and I don't like the thought of any of those people coming to Australia. I'm concerned about the safety of people who get on these leggy boats to come down to Australia. That's what I'm concerned about. We're saving lives of these people. Oh, really? Yeah, how much did you know, pulling the boats back. What kind of policy is that? Anyway.
Yes, Bruce. Earlier you mentioned about a reasonable period in detention. You mentioned a time of 3 months. Now, we've got a question base here which puzzles me and a lot of other Aussies. Just put my glasses on. The question is, what's the standard procedure in investigating the bona fides of people seeking asylum, and how long does it take to get the appropriate information? Just before you answer that question.
It's a very good question.
Right, okay.
And highly appropriate.
The big puzzle that comes to people, I don't object to people coming here and being put in detention for a short period. And you more or less said the same thing.
I do.
And that's what the average Aussie does not understand. Why does it take many, many years? Is it because the government hasn't got sufficient staff investigating? Or what's the reason? That's what the average Aussie does not comprehend. Given we've got this policy that's stuck with the government, and the alternative government would have a similar policy, the big issue is, why can't we clear up these investigations in a reasonable time, like you said, 3 months?
Yeah. No, it's an excellent question and highly appropriate. In the UK, and I actually, because I was interested in the area, the UK High Commissioner did this thing where I actually started off down in Calais when they apprehended people, and the processing, and then where they took them, and they were there for several weeks, where they investigated things. In the US, I talked to them, people, and in Canada, but I didn't actually go and physically see it. And, you know, this whole issue, why does it take so long? What happens is, as they sit there, is it goes to the security people, to ASIO and ACES. Do you know anything about it? This person, now they've already got their key list of people who are on the Al-Qaeda list and Jama'ah Islamiyah, the ones who were involved in the Bali bombings and so on, those key groups and terrorist groups, they've got all the key names and so on, so where they can match them up. And some of them do come without papers, which makes it more complicated. But what happens is, and I know this from the guy who was there at the Department of Prime Ministers, and he said, they take far too long. He agreed with me. And he said, because they ring up the post and said, have you heard about this guy, you know, and it takes them forever to find out until they get an answer. So from my point of view, I was interested in the same thing as you were about the security, about how long, because it takes so long. So in our Human Rights Committee, before I left Parliament, we had the head of ASIO come in a closed session, and we said to him, okay, of the people that have come by boat, how many represented security threats to Australia? And the answer was 0. 0! And people have sat there for years while they check out the security issue, and the answer was 0. And the reason is, as kind of, you know, as I remember having a discussion with this guy, one of the senior officials in Canada, and he said, people who are terrorists don't come by way of boat, being a boat person, or an asylum seeker. They'll come in as a holidaymaker. They'll have all the support. They'll come in as a tourist. With all the right documentations produced, you wouldn't know the difference. People who come by boat, they're usually the most vulnerable of all, and don't have the money to do any of that. And so it takes forever, you know, sometimes you just haven't got the documents. But the answer is, you know, at that point in time, I understand there were a couple that were of the Tamils, Tamil Tigers, who were of the conflict. Generally, that's the situation. So that's why I have to, why does it take you so long? Let them out in the community while they're being processed, and if they're not, send them back. So...
just a quick one, in South African. I don't stop job. In South Africa, there's a major problem with influx of illegal immigrants, and it's because the borders are far more difficult to police.
Yes, yes.
What always perplexes me in Australia is that the numbers are so marginal, irrelevant, really. What sort of numbers? I can't understand why 500,000 people aren't welcome via the right process, whatever that is. Do you have an idea of what sustainable numbers might be in terms of processing power?
Well, you know, it is an expensive business settling people in Australia, so there is a limit to which you can absorb people in an orderly process. So they've increased it to 20,000, which there was agreement from both sides at first, and now it's been changed again. But that's not a bad kind of level to have it at. You know, process, if you're taking that number and you're taking them for refugee camps, then you can eliminate, not eliminate, but reduce significantly the number who are coming by boat. If they think they're going to be processed fairly quickly by UNHCR and come down here, but Canada takes a lot more. They take about 40,000. The Americans take about 50,000 a year. I mean, bigger country, bigger economy, lots more people.
It seems small though, no?
It's what, 20,000?
50,000 doesn't seem like a lot.
No, I know, but you know, it requires, because I'm chairman of this committee of the settlement, there is quite a lot in getting people settled in the country, and it is, you know, there are expenses with all this, and the absorption, and it's difficult to provide them jobs. You know, I got involved just recently. We kind of got all these people, and you might have heard, won't pick on Scott again because he's a friend, but he was talking about the fact that, you know, 5 years after, these people don't have jobs, you know, they live off welfare and so on. He was being a bit naughty because he was including people who are on family benefits and so on, which quite a lot of middle class and French Forest would be too. But there is a problem in getting jobs, particularly unskilled. So, you know, and I just said to the minister, look, you know, you've got all these people lobbying you, companies, why can't you bring them together, you know, and say, how many will you take? So Heather Ridout, who was head of the Australian Industry Group, and someone I talked to who was sympathetic on this issue, I said, why don't we convene a meeting of, you know, some companies who might be involved? And we had National Australia Bank, Woolworths, McDonald's, restaurant and catering, Accor hotels, Woolworths, and so on. And we all agreed that they would take a certain number each year, unskilled, do some training and so on. And the thing is that, you know, in terms of the tourism area, people are crying out for people to do basic jobs. And these guys and girls are wanting to do these groups and put together. We've actually got the trial on right now with Accor Hotels, which is the biggest hotel chain, and apparently it's going quite well. So I think if they did more of that, we could absorb a lot more. Because a lot of these unskilled jobs, as you know, people, Australians often don't want to do it. So time for the cricket soon. For the tennis, I mean.
It was my wife, so I had...
Alright.
My question's really simple, but I just wanted to ask, how do we increase our voice? Because we've been talking a lot about, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of people who are negative. How do we as Christians lobby better? How do we make our voices known in terms of what we believe? Can we be more political about this? Can we be more savvy in the way that we express what we feel and think?
I just think you need to take a chance when you see politicians stand up and speak. As you'll see, they're going to be all out there the next 9 months. Push back on some of the things that they say. Question them, what they're doing. And it's difficult with media. You know, the ABC is refugee friendly, the Herald is, Australians not, Telegraph is not, 2GB is not. Although to be fair, when we're in the middle of the private members bill, Jonesy kept quiet because he had a friend who we used to kind of keep him quiet. But you know, so you work with what you've got.
That's why we've got you. Bruce, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
This is wind up.
Yes. Someone wants to watch the tennis, I think. Really, really appreciate you coming and speaking and opening our eyes and our ears and hopefully our hearts to this bigger picture that will read things differently, see things differently, that immensely appreciate that. I'll just show this t-shirt. Welly, can you put your hand up? He's got, whoops, a couple of those for sale if you want that. We've got supper happening right now up the back. I don't know how long you can hang around for, but I'm sure a couple of people will want to chat with you briefly, and then you've got somewhere to go straight after this. Let me pray, but thank you again for being here tonight. Father, thank you for this night, and thank you that you have your people and you're using others in significant ways to push back against the rhetoric and the misinformation and the lies. Lord God, we thank you for Bruce and the work that he's done and is doing, and we pray that you would raise up more and more people that will be able to show compassion. And Lord God, if there are people here tonight that you intend to use in the future to show compassion, to reach out to the powerless and to the needy, Father, I thank you. Lord God, work in us by your Spirit to change us, to want to show love